Welcome, everyone. I'm Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of DevX, and just delighted to be with all of you back again in person here in Davos. It's wonderful to be with all of you, and with all of you who are joining us through the live stream. We're here to talk about what is one of the most important issues in the world today, and that is the most fragile markets, the most fragile economies in the world, and what we can do to increase investment there. The World Economic Forum has had an initiative through partners now launched since 2019 directly to address this. It's called the Humanitarian and Resilience Investing Initiative. We're going to talk about that today. How is it going? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the opportunities? Let me just introduce who we have here, and then we'll dive into the subject matter. We're joined by Claire Akamanzi, who's the CEO of the Rwanda Development Board, Peter Maurer, the president of the International Committee for the Red Cross, and a member of the Board of Trustees here at the World Economic Forum. Hi, Peter. Gelsomina Vigliotti, who is the vice president of the European Investment Bank, and Mazen Darwaze, who's an executive vice chairman of Hikma Pharmaceuticals and is also a member of the Senate in Jordan. Good to be with all of you. I just tell you a quick vignette, a quick story from a prior World Economic Forum event I attended. I was out networking, like we all do, in these sessions in the hallway, and I was talking to an executive, a top executive of a major global corporation. And a top executive of a global NGO walked up to us. And this is the conversation I witnessed. The NGO executive said, hey, you know, we have our gala coming up, our charitable fundraiser. We would love if your company could write a check and sponsor it. And they had a nice cordial conversation, exchanged cards, and the NGO executive walked away. And the executive of the corporation said to me, this is a few years ago, boy, what a shame. You know, they're looking for small money from us, a small check, which we're happy to write. But we have so much expertise. We invest millions, even billions in markets around the world. Isn't there more we could be doing? And really, that's the impetus for this conversation today. In the most fragile markets in the world where some 1 billion people live, what more can we do? Not that philanthropy and charity are unimportant. They're critical. But what beyond that can we do? And of course, here at the World Economic Forum, it's an ideal venue to get into that debate. So Peter, I thought maybe we could begin with you as we have this conversation today. You were part of launching this initiative. You've been around it for a while. But I think many people have a hard time grasping, what do we even mean by humanitarian investing? Is there an investment case in some of these most fragile, most conflict-affected places like Syria, where I understand you just returned from? What do you see happening on the ground that to you would define humanitarian investing?
Well, 2 or 3 things pop to my mind, although I have to confess that it took me a couple of years to get my head around humanitarian investment and not look at humanitarian and investment as polarities which have nothing to do with each other. I think it starts first with the recognition from humanitarian organizations, then substituting basic social services over long periods of time and conflict is decapacitating societies, and at the end of the day violates the principle of do no harm that humanitarians are so strongly committed. And therefore, I think over the last couple of years, we started deliberately, wherever we were, to look for exit strategies. And humanitarian investment is basically an exit strategy against dependency. It's looking on whether some of the social services delivered through what we are doing can be substituted by economic modeling, which would bring us closer to market and to basically sustainability and resilience creation in societies. And I think a good example may be what we have done in several places, including in Syria, in the DRC now, in sustainable water management. If you do in Goma or Aleppo, water management today, you basically do water trucking because the water infrastructure is down. You can do water trucking for 10 years. It's costly, it's unsustainable, it's decapacitating, or you can invest into the rehabilitation of the water distribution system and try to fix the basics so that there is water again in sufficient quantity coming to household. If you do that, you may look at different forms of finance. You may not bring that to the private sector because that would be too risky a jump to do immediately. But what you can do is step by step create a market rationale for water distribution systems in Goma, in Aleppo, in other cities in which we are active, and then over time see to bring private investment, big bank, global and regional development bank investment, humanitarian investment, philanthropic investment into a cluster of contributions in which each one has a role to play in a sort of value chain of creating social services to people, which is, of course, much more sustainable than just continue another 10 years to do water trucking in Aleppo or Goma, which is completely unsustainable in all respects.
And we know, and in fact, part of this initiative is the word humanitarian, but there's also the word resilience, because we know crises are multiplying in number and they're growing in severity. And if you do water trucking now with no sustainable approach, you may need to really increase the amount of water trucking going forward. It's not just that it's unsustainable today, you may have to scale it. Really, this problem, the one you bring up, Peter, is not so much a civil engineering problem. People have known how to get water. It's a financial engineering problem.
It's a financial engineering problem. And what we have done really over the last 2 years in the seven biggest cities of Syria, we have basically done planning on what would be needed in terms of pipes and tubes and pumps and knowledge and how we would be able to finance. And the same in Goma. In Goma, we have been able to identify sort of a volume of 40 million on which the World Bank contributes with 15 million. Some private philanthropists contributed to the studies, and basically we hope now to really find the 25 million from the private sector in order to blend those different financial streams. It's very much whether you are able, as different institutions with mandates, with rules, with procedures, with legislations that are binding you, to find the soft spot in which you can bring those issues together and create something which alone you wouldn't be able to create.
Claire, you're famous for finding this soft spot in Rwanda, finding this nexus where there's a development opportunity, where maybe there's philanthropic aid, but also an opportunity to invest. Give us a sense of what are some of the places you're seeing these opportunities in your own context as you look to develop Rwanda's economy.
Thank you, Raj. I think, first of all, if we look back to Rwanda's own context, 1994 genocide against the Tutsis, 1 million people lost, infrastructure broken, fragile as fragile can be defined. Today, maybe 28 years later, Rwanda today is ranked the second easiest place to do business in Africa. Rwanda is ranked the 38th easiest place to do business in the world. And Rwanda, if you look at the FDI investments that we were able to attract, both locally and foreign investments, into 1995, there was nothing. 2005, less than $100 million. 2010, about $398 million. 2021, $3.7 billion. So I think that growth tells the story of how a country can actually make itself competitive over time to attract investments in the country. And for us, I'll probably talk about 3 or 4 ways that we did that and some of the examples of investments that we saw coming from that. One was addressing the very issue why the country is not stable. For us, it was divisionism. And so addressing what the people want, which is they want hope for the future, they want stability. So addressing that was very important. It took us a lot of time to do that. Fixing governance, as well as fighting corruption. Today, Rwanda is ranked among the least corrupt areas. In many fragile contexts, you'll find corruption thriving because there's no rule of law, there's no order. I think for us, fixing that was very important and bringing the people along with the vision that we had to fight that. But to do that, we also had to tap into the strength of the communities. There's something we call homegrown solutions, which is, as you think about socioeconomic development, where are some of the areas that the community already has that you can build on to create value? One example is one cow per family project. Rwandans love keeping cows. Having a cow is an asset, is a symbol of asset. How do you address key issues using that tradition? Giving everybody a cow, and then when an offspring is born, the next family gets it, and you keep going around. that addresses many things. One, milk for nutrition, because we had a huge problem of stunting that we had to address. Also being able to use it as an economic asset, milk to sell, also to get money, but also being able to live with a social community. So one cow per family was one example that was very useful. I think the next example is how do you bring all partners together to play their role? To do that, you have to organize. The problem with fragile context sometimes that everybody comes and they want to do the things. You know, NGOs come, they have their own agenda. International organizations, World Bank, IMF, IMC have their own. A country has to be very clear about what it wants, and everybody else must be part of that. Rwanda did that very clearly. We defined what we wanted to do and where the priorities were, and we said if you want, for example, in agriculture, we said we want to bring fertilizers, we want to do land consolidation, we want to bring seeds for our farmers. If you want to help, this is what you're going to help in. And I remember there's one organization that wanted to give us food. And we said, no, we don't want food. We want farmers to be empowered to be able to grow the food. And this international institution, you know, couldn't do that. So we said, fine, you can take back the food. They actually took the food back out of the country. But that was the lesson that if you want to work with us, then let's organize ourselves. If you don't organize yourselves, then the chaos will continue and even investments can't thrive over time. The other one is how to use public investments. For us, we invested very much in public infrastructure. The first telecom company that came to the country was a public investment. Today, we have private investments. The first hotel that was built in Rwanda was a public investment. Everybody criticized the decision. Today, we have Marriott, Radisson, Park Inn, Serena, all these hotels in the country. But using public investments to demonstrate or to show that you can de-risk that sector so that others can come in was very, very important.
That's a key word in this debate, de-risking. You will hear that a lot, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And then also bringing philanthropic organizations. Today, for example, you have Howard Buffett Foundation that is in the country. When they came to Rwanda, they said, what do you need? And we told them, this is what we need. We need a school of conservation agriculture. And they invested in that. And so I think very much clarifying and defining what you want and being able to bring investors, I think is helpful. Lastly, building a conducive business environment that private sector can actually come in. Private sector will come in, but you have to do a lot of de-risking, as I said. When we invested a lot in the public investments and were able to demonstrate, today we have, you know, almost all the banks, 15 banks are private, all the hotels are private, yet before that, government had to invest in that. So making it attractive, removing regulations. It takes 6 hours to register business in Rwanda today. 10 years ago, it would take almost a month just to register business. We reduced that from a month to 6 hours. Being able to transfer property within just 2 weeks, it used to take almost a year before that. So progressively removing regulations that were obstacles to business and making Rwanda attractive for business, I think ends up attracting investments as well.
So we're hearing an important case about what governments need to do. Now, in many fragile situations, there isn't a government in a position to do what the Rwanda's government has done in these examples. You know, maybe, Mazen, you can talk to us a bit about what a private company can do. You're the president in MENA for the company. You're looking at a region where there's massive migration, there's a lot of instability. How do you operate across these challenging contexts? Countries like Libya, countries like Syria. How do you operate in these places knowing that the context may not be as clear as what Claire has just laid out in hers, and yet you're looking for these business opportunities to serve many millions of people who need access to medicine?
Kumar, we have to go back to the basics. When you're in pharma, you're in medication. And medication, it means better health care provided for everyone in times of crisis and in good times. Now, when we started 45 years ago, the principles of the company was always to have affordable medicines for communities around the world, not only in the Arab world, in other parts of the world. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, the Arab world, you know, has dismantled. We had several situations before the Arab Spring and before the civil wars that happened in that part. We were always trying to do as much as we can with the local communities by employing people, building up infrastructures, building manufacturing facilities in order to satisfy the local needs of the population, and providing them with the medications that they need. Now, in many cases, when we were a private company, we became public. When we became public, we started having the balance aspect. How do you balance your stakeholders being a publicly listed company and keep the sustainability of a long-term humanitarian aspect of your business? Because pharma is unlike other industries. You cannot say tomorrow for a patient that has kidney dialysis or kidney transplant, sorry, I cannot give you the medication because the Syrian government is not functioning. and you don't ship. If you don't ship, they will die. So you have to balance things and keep on the sustainability of your patients, your stakeholders. Because by the end of the day, it doesn't become a financial decision. It becomes a decision where you balance being a public company, a sustainable, ethical company in providing better healthcare and affordable medicine. Now, all of these countries that we've been talking about have always had their ups and downs. But by the end of the day, regardless of the countries we invest in, I'll give you a very good example. During Egypt, when the Arab Spring came, then the Islamic movement came, and the other governments came, we were investing in Egypt. We were employing. So we always say, once we employ more people on the ground, you develop the communities, you develop their well-being, and you continue. So actually, in the West, one of the prime ministers said, but now Egypt is not a friendly place to invest when it was the government of that was. I told him, you know, for us, it's a long term. We don't look at governments, we don't look at politics, we look at the human aspect of how to develop things. Now, how do you tie that with the values of being a public company? This is where the context, like Mauer said, how do you keep that process going on as a company that's leading in a region whereby it's difficult? But we have to keep on doing what we do best. For the other part, the spillover that we've been talking about, it's becoming more difficult to sustain that if the world is going to go into a recession, if the world is going to go into more economic depravity, if the banks are going to become more expensive to do business. This is where the global institutions have to work with responsible companies in keeping them alive in these markets by giving them a long-term process of how to invest. Because if we stop investment and we become a pure business, then finito, there's nothing more to do. This is where I think the partnership of sustainability has to be proactive and has to be responsibility of the world institutions, how they work with countries and how they work with firms in sustainable development of these countries.
Gus, I think Mazen is talking about you. We're in this incredible moment of crisis. Klaus Schwab mentioned that in this morning's address, that it's an unprecedented moment, confluence of crises. People are looking to what they can do from their own institutional lens, and many are looking at the major global institutions like the European Investment Bank. I think you've just come back from Palestine, you mentioned. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what you're actually doing in this moment. What are some examples? Many of the cases that we probably all know in this room and we're hearing today deal with water and sanitation investments or food and agriculture, healthcare. I think a lot of what major international institutions like yours are doing are thinking about the financial system and lending through banks and through platforms. Talk to us a bit about how that works, maybe in Palestine or beyond.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for letting us to participate in this discussion. Actually, the European Investment Bank, maybe it's not very well known within the development world, but actually we are operating within fragile countries for 60 years. Actually, we are present in most of the countries denominated as fragile according to the OECD. And actually, what is our role there? Our role there is, and I would like very much to take points which were already raised before. We are big financiers of large infrastructures and also of small and medium enterprises and very small business activity. Why these are important? We understand that through, actually an economy to work, it needs infrastructure. Water. We talked about water. There are many parts of the world where, we need clean water. We need water management, wastewater management, which is actually key for developing any type of, of life, but at the same time also for business. So actually, and if you do not have infrastructure, good infrastructure, it's also very difficult, to have, business flourishing and to incentivize private sector. So in that regard, we have a very long experience in very large infrastructure projects throughout the world, in many also fragile situations. But also, I said before, also in fostering private sector business. And how we do it? We do it through the local banking system. We are a large institution. We are increasing our presence in the field, but we are just started Actually, it was this year that we started with a dedicated branch for global activities outside of the European Union, because I would like to recall that we are a European Union bank, so our shareholders are the European Union governments, and we pursue the policy objective. But it was very clear that actually, annually we have investment outside of the European Union in the order of 8-10 billion, which is actually, it's a lot of resources, and our idea now is to improve our strategy on enhancing the developing impact, and also, to address in a better way also how we enter in different development situations. If you are in fragile situation, if you are in an emerging economy, so the approach it's different. But as I said, we very often work through the banking system to achieve the small business community. Actually, we have a limited presence on the field, and we rely on the local banking system to reach, the small business opportunities. I mentioned to you before that I was in Palestine, and actually I see that there is also the CEO of the Bank of Palestine here in the room. And actually there we developed two initiatives. One during the COVID with the 300 million. Actually, it was a way also to support this economy, but also in other parts of the world to address the COVID-19 crisis. And right now, with the 200 million, is a package which is dedicated to the development of small and medium enterprises activities. You referred to the difficult situation now of high interest rate, of these economic difficulties. What we can do is to de-risk our financing and to blend our resources, which actually are banking resources, through, for instance, the grant by the European Commission. What is important, for instance, part of the financial package that we dedicated to Palestine is for Gaza. And in Gaza, actually, the situation is very, very difficult, and we understand that to promote business, what is necessary is that, for instance, that we lower the level of collateral which is required by the banks to start an activity. So through our blending grant resources and lending resources, it will be possible to de-risk the level of the project, to provide, for instance, also incentive for the ones which do not have collateral to start an activity. But this is not sufficient, just the financing support. Actually, what is important is, first of all, that we are policy aligned with the policy priority of the economies in which we work. Is that we have a close strategic partnership with all the stakeholders which are present in an economy. It's the humanitarian institutions, the private sector, other financial institutions. We have to share the same goal to achieve the same project. And let me finish on one issue which is particularly relevant to us, which is climate. We like to call ourselves like the climate bank. And we see, it's a great relation between fragility and climate. It's climate actually it's one of the source of fragilities in many situations. So we have to work for mitigate climate change impact, and we understand that in these ways it will be possible also to contribute to lower the level of conflict, because the access to resources is one of the source of conflict, and so if we can mitigate the climate impact, I think that we can also lower the level of conflict. But at the same time, we are also conscious that if we live in an environment where the level of conflict and fragility can be lowered, also the fight against the climate change can be easier.
Yeah, these things are so interrelated.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a new report out, the World Economic Forum has put out a strategy in partnership with the IKEA Foundation looking at this humanitarian resilience investing initiative over the next 2 years, 2022 to 2024. And it lays out a lot of the themes we've already picked up here about the challenges, the disconnects. And so I thought maybe we could zone in on that for a moment, Peter, especially with you. You know, if we're in this moment, as Klaus Schwab talks about it, it's kind of a break the glass moment, you know, major crises around the world. And we're somehow, we have interesting ideas and initiatives. We can come up with these good examples we just heard, but things are not really going to scale. There's now 100 million people displaced around the world. If it were a country, it would be something like the 15th largest country in the world. And you might think, hey, that's a big economy, we could invest into it. But what this strategy, what this report shows is that it's not so easy to just go invest in these markets. There are huge gaps, there's fragmentation, there are good ideas, but there isn't enough de-risking capital. There are good ideas and entrepreneurs, but there aren't enough systems or government regulations. What are you seeing? You've been working on this for years. Do you think we're at a different moment now in this? Is there a different opportunity here, or is just the crisis bigger and the gaps are just what they were before?
I think there is a progress part which transpires by a lot of what has been said, by Claire and by you just a minute ago. And the progress part is that the proof of concept has been made in many places that investments or blended finance and aligning different sorts of finance, if the governance structures are in place, or if substitutes in terms of consensus building of communities are in place, then the proof of concept has been made that something else than just substitution in crisis situation is possible. What is difficult and what I see is when we work bottom up and top down, we see a lot of roadblocks. When we work top down, we still have, a lot of development institutions, multilateral, bilateral development agencies, which have a hell of a lot of a problem accepting these new types of market-oriented projects and to finance them. It never fits the box that has been decided in those institutions as being the right one. And despite the fact, for instance, that over the last couple of years, almost every development institution has created a fragility strategy, these fragility strategies take a lot of pain to trickling down through the institutions and getting the roadblocks removed so that real finances arrive at the bottom.
Well, we're using the word de-risking, but that means that the risk has to grow on one side of the ledger, which is for the development organization.
For the development organization. And the development bank, as I have heard many times over the last couple of years, is still a bank and doesn't like risks. So the question is, what are the risk sharing, risk transfer elements that we are integrating? What are the bureaucratic obstacles? What are the political obstacles? When you want to do financing in Syria and Afghanistan these days, you encounter political obstacles. When you want to do in certain contexts, you encounter legislation, sanctions to overcome. So not every place is Rwanda, where basically you have a free road to do what you decide to do. So there are roadblocks which we have to look at and to see how we can overcome them in order to grow to scale. Then, very frankly, from the bottom-up perspective, that's also difficult because you need, in order to run a health system, in order to run a water distribution and sanitation system in some of these places, you need skills and capacities. And while they are normally developed quite well, you still need to build modern systems. And it needs education, training, capacities to manage, and there are obstacles which make it difficult. We have seen that in launching our humanitarian impact bond on the creation of 3 physical rehabilitation centers in fragile contexts in Africa. And we got private sector capital, we got humanitarian capital, we blended it, we have some return on investment schemes. But of course, to find in 3 hyper-fragile countries in conflict, the necessary skills and capacities to run physical rehabilitation centers needs to be addressed. And it doesn't happen from one day to another. So these bureaucratic, political, legislative, regulatory, from top to bottom, and the skills and capacity issues, they are important. And then the last one is really that I found so interesting in your example, Claire, the governance issue. And then you said at a certain moment, sometimes we don't have the governments to talk to and to take these decisions for potential foreign investors to tell them where to go. And here, this is really delicate in order to find, for instance, and to negotiate community consensus over certain areas where then investment is possible. And maybe a last one, which I may say, because it was also part of the discussion just beforehand. We tend to think also in two broad baskets, which needs different sort of type of approaches. One basket is really the infrastructural you were alluding to. On the infrastructural side, I think we made progress, and I am quite hopeful that with a proof of concept, we can move to speed and scale. What I find still quite difficult to get my head around is really the sort of promotion of small business so that they can evolve to microcredit graduation, basically. And there is something to do before you can introduce microfinance into a society. And we see it very much in refugee camps where businesses are created, but from there to basically go into market and to be able to take a credit, to service a credit, is a big leap that we have underestimated. And what it needs as an investment and front-loading of philanthropic money, of money which can't generate return.
Yeah, when you see this strategy for the humanitarian and resilience investing initiative, a lot of it is at that early stage, right? Because development organizations are so used to going in and doing a project, but this is a very different conception. You're thinking about a business. And so you need that project originator or that entrepreneur, and then you need the conditions, including the financial conditions, to get going. So much of the roadmap that's been laid out by this initiative is at those early stages. I do want to bring our audience into the discussion. So we'll go around in a minute with a microphone and get your questions. Maybe, Mazen, I can just go to you very briefly, because you're representing the private sector here in a way on this panel. And you're investing, presumably, in suppliers, in various small and medium enterprises, kind of to the point of Peter, in a lot of these kinds of countries. What are your challenges? Do you find that there are ready partners that you can go and invest in and work with? Or do you find you have to build up businesses and invest in entrepreneurs in these markets? What are the real-life conditions you see every day? But
during the last 40 or 4 decades, we have invested in starting these entrepreneurs and these suppliers in order and able to have the supply chain complete in the markets we're living in. So we've invested a lot in that. But this brings me to something about the sustainability of these fragile markets to start with. Now, these fragile markets, you have to remember, the world stopped for 3 years because of COVID. Now we're back into the new pandemic, which is called the new norm of life. My worry is that even today, a very big chunk of the population worldwide has not been vaccinated. And these markets become more fragile once you have the pandemics going on. So where is the responsibility of the global world today in addressing the vaccination process? The whole world has been vaccinated. Only those who could afford it have been vaccines. Those who could not afford it don't have vaccines. We're talking about Syria. The penetration of vaccine maybe is 3 or 4%, as we discussed. We're talking about Libya. We're talking about Sudan. We're talking about Africa, South America. All of these economies, if you want them to be sustainable and to be productive and being resilient through the other institutions, we have to give them the basics. The world agreed that we will give them the basics, but we have failed them. And if I look today at the worldwide population, I'm really worried about the sustainability of these economies going forward if they're going to keep going into these process of having these outbreaks. So this is something I think it's very important that the world must be responsible in addressing going forward also.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to the agenda, because when we think about what the fragility context is, COVID is certainly a big and relatively new piece of that. Let's go to our audience here. I know there's a lot of expertise in this room. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions in rapid fire format. Just raise your hand and someone will come to you with a microphone if you have a question or something you want to add to the discussion. See one over here. We'll take maybe 2 or 3, and then we'll let the panel respond. Go ahead. Please tell us your name and organization, Sarah.
Thanks, Raj. Sara Pantuliano from ODI, and I've also been involved with the initiative from the start. We've been discussing this for a while at the forum, and yet the issues that come when we discuss to the fore are always why we're not going at scale, what is still sort of preventing us from, this quantum leap that we need to make. And as I was listening to the discussion, because again, these are issues that are live for me, I was actually thinking whether, some of the problem is also the trust deficit that we have amongst, the stakeholders that are to invest in a particular context, and whether there is something that the platform that we have can do to create almost a one-stop shop that also helps, create, that trust in a particular context. There are also a lot of assumptions about a particular, country where it's just defined as, fragile, which is not a very good label, really. Mm-hmm. If you want people, to engage, you want to engage somewhere where you feel that is optimistic, to go in and invest. And so there is some of the taxonomy that I think we really do need to change, but it's also guiding, the business scene in understanding that in a lot of these places there is a very differentiated markets according to the part of the country in which you can work, and our role as those who work more deeply in these countries should be to help sort of that coming in. And then there is a little bit of self-reflection from the development and humanitarian community, because let's face it, we are still pushing with some exceptions, but we're still pushing the usual model that yes, we do want to collaborate, but ultimately we want money for the system as it is from the private sector, rather than really changing, the modalities of collaboration. And finally, it's the governments. They really, grant money ultimately doesn't come back. So even if there is a risk associating in blending, we need to blend a lot more, because there is at least an opportunity to try and, leverage that investment in a different way. So it's more a comment than a question. But
no, but that's great. But many reflections for us to riff off of. Anyone else here wants to add a question or comment to the debate? There's one over here.
Thank you. My name is Adam, and I'm from Cotonou. I'm a global shipper. Back in 2018, I've attended the summit of the Red Cross and Red Croissant in Lomé, Togo, and I noticed that I was the only one young entrepreneur in that room. I'd like to know what's the place of us young African, because we are about to be 1 billion, and I've heard the discussions, but I didn't get the focus on the young African. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can take one more, if there is one. One more comment or question. I think on this side of the room we have one.
Thank you.
We can. Please, go ahead.
I'm the responsible, Baker McKenzie, the law firm responsible for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I have a general question that is affecting Africa, but also all the, let's say, economies that are more fragile. And it's related to this present situation of the war in Ukraine. My perception is that the pandemic has been tougher, it's more fragile economies, and now the war is difficult to see a positive outcome or something positive deriving from a war. I'd like to know your views in how the Ukraine war may affect the position of the economies in Africa and other fragile economies. So thinking not only about the threat, but also potential opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we can use the response to these comments as our wrap-up remarks from our panel, as we have just a few minutes left. So I'll ask you to pick up on any of the threads that you might like to. Sarah gave us many, including the trust deficit, the way we even think about these markets as fragile, which maybe right off the bat makes investors think this is not a place I want to be. And what are some of those gaps that we face? Do we need more of a one-stop shop, as she put it, more of a coalition, maybe at the WEF level, to facilitate these investments? Maybe we can begin with you.
Yes, actually, picking up this question on how to scale business in this situation, to me, governance is extremely important, because, I mean, if in Gaza they have electricity just 12 hours per day, how can you, develop, for instance, food or agri industry there? So there is a need to solve that issue. I mean, if you do not have a regulatory system which can support you the way in which you trade, how you trade, how can you scale up? So I think that, business opportunity can be created and from my experience, it's at a small scale, but to become larger, you need infrastructure, you need governance, and you need also to create a context where, private sector is also attracted, because otherwise, it will be very difficult to fail. On the role of the in multilateral development institutions, yes, it's true. Now, it's resources are scarce.
Everyone's looking to you.
Exactly, resources are scarce, and now with the Ukraine crisis, which actually it's creating a very difficult environment, because the Ukrainian need will be huge, but at the same time we know that in all the rest of the world the need of resources will be because there will be food security issues, there will be inflation issues, there will be the climate issue. So we have to look on how to optimize resources. De-risking, we can de-risk it. I mean, all the multilateral development bank, they can have concessional arms, and to have resources to be dedicated to the fragile situation. There, actually, there is a strong push on governments, to be sure that they continue to providing resources to this institution, which actually can continue doing is an important job in these economies.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big story that we will continue to look at. How did the multilateral investment banks do more? Claire, maybe we can go to you and reflect in any way you like. Maybe think of Adam's point about young entrepreneurs. How do you bring them into this discussion more as you think about developing your own country's economy?
So, yeah, thank you, Raj. Adam, the youth of Africa is a force that you cannot ignore. If anybody's thinking about planning for the future, the youth of Africa have to be part of that. And you have to balance. So today, for example, in Rwanda, we're thinking about how do we make agriculture more productive. That is the old school. That's the population that has been on subsistence agriculture. But at the same time, you're thinking about the young people, majority of whom are less than 30. How do you define a future for them? For us, it's been in the following ways. One, on supporting them to grow their own businesses. We have something that we call the Business Development Fund that we put in place that guarantees up to 75% of a loan. So you can go to a loan, the risk for the bank is 25%. That has helped very much for very small micro entrepreneurs to access funding. The other one is innovation. We all know that African youth are very innovative. The problem is, how do they take their innovations to market? The link between the idea that they have and the financing to make it scalable, but also to prove that it's actually commercial, is where the gap is. We've built something called the Rwanda Innovation City, as well as the Rwanda Innovation Fund, that actually attracts entrepreneurs from not just Rwanda, but the whole of Africa. If you come and set up there, you access this funding. Half of it is from the African Development Bank. We hope that that's going to be an opportunity for Africans to really come up with solutions that they can take to market. The last example I want to give is skills. I think you talked about skills. That's a challenge. Sometimes you want to build skills as a country, but it might take so long for you to be able to build the skills that you want. We're thinking about innovations, but we don't have the skills for innovations. We went to Carnegie Mellon University in the US, the best you can think about. We told them, come to Rwanda and set up a university. I believe the first time they had that, they thought we were crazy. But we told them, look, just bring your name. Everything else we will do. We'll finance everything. We'll give you the building. Just bring your name. And they did. Today we have over 400 Africans that have graduated from the Carnegie Mellon University. And after government of Rwanda spending maybe about $60 million to prove that concept, MasterCard Foundation came last year and invested $350 million to guarantee Africans who come to Rwanda to study up to 30% of total scholarship that the university will need. So it's very important to think out of the box, but you have to build a future for the young Africans.
Yeah, and interesting to think top-down, bottom-up, as Peter mentioned. Top-down, maybe it's the MDBs, but I'm glad we have the word entrepreneur has joined the discussion too. We need that from the bottom up. We just have 30 seconds left. Mazen, what are your quick takeaways from these conversations and what you want to add?
I'm just answering the question about Ukraine and talking about Gaza, that you don't have electricity for 12 hours. Remember that Gaza is under occupation. And with that, you want the private sector also to flourish and give them opportunity. But there are other things that also the world needs to do from a political point of view, is ending what these things, how they are deterring the business, how they're deterring entrepreneurship, and how they're depriving the new generation. Like you just said, in Africa, there are new generation of Palestinian kids in Gaza not being able to go to basics because of what's going on. So let's look at the world how in a full context of what we need to do, rather than taking silos and talking about them.
Thank you. And Peter, we're out of time, but I give you the last thought.
Well, I wanted to come back also to the young entrepreneurs. I think it's one of those other scaling and speeding issues which we have recognized. I think we do have great projects in identifying talents in humanitarian action and having cooperation with Tony Elumelu in that case, for instance, in identifying young entrepreneurs, bringing them fast out of dependency. The question is a little bit in a forum like here, how many Tony Elumelu do you get in order to get to scale in moving young entrepreneurs in Africa to scale? The second thing, I'm convinced that we will not get out of these discussions being abstract if we don't move the needle to more de-risking. And more de-risking is, at the end of the day, political decisions that you put risk capital available for what we have recognized now functions if capital is available. Trust will come by success, and trust, you can't front load trust. Trust will be the result of good economic performance. And the last thing I wanted to recognize, as I have led an organization for 10 years now, the logic to shift from fundraising to spend to invest for impact is a big cultural shift. And you can't possibly make it just easily in one organization. You have to have at least two cultures. And if you don't get to those two cultures protected and striving within your own organization, you always get them competing instead of producing good results.
You're talking about shifting the business model, the very business model of what is a $200 billion industry, the global aid and development industry.
Yes.
That's not easy. I just will mention that I know we're all going to remember this Davos, partly because of the weather and the unusual circumstances of this gathering. But I think we'll also remember it because of this rare moment that we have, this moment perhaps just before the major food crisis hits, this moment as we're looking at tremendous fragility, geopolitical challenges layering on top, and asking ourselves, what are we in this group doing? So we're really honored to get to co-host this session here at DevEx with the World Economic Forum and to try to pursue more answers to some of these key questions that we brought up today. I thank our panelists. I thank all of you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rod. Hey, great to see you.